Hello. Walter Rauschenbusch, Christianity and the Social Crisis, page 204. He's winding down his chapter, The Work of Social Reconstruction, reviewing the centuries before Rauschenbusch's generation around 1900. The ascetic and monastic ideal, which dominated Christian life for 1,000 years or more, has disappeared almost completely. If the saints that lie buried under the stone floor of some ancient European church could rise and listen to a modern sermon, they would find their gospel turned upside down. Instead of praise of virginity, they would hear eulogies of family life. Instead of the call to poverty, they would hear the praise of Christianity because it makes men and nations prosperous and wealthy. Instead of exhortations to wear their flesh thin with fasting and vigil, they would be invited to membership in the YMCA with gymnasium and bath to keep their flesh in a glow of health. If the old gospel of individualism should hereafter change into the gospel of socialism, the change would not be half as great as that involved in the surrender of the ascetic ideal of the Christian life. Some ascetic practices still linger in the observance of Lent. The ascetic notion occasionally crops up that men are best turned to God by affliction, and that revivals follow on hard times. The distrust of the intellectual and artistic and political life in English evangelicalism and German pietism, the retirement of the Christian within the untroubled realm of family and business life, is a diluted Protestant form of the ascetic flight from the world. The Roman Church, by force of its strong medieval traditions, still exalts the monastic life as the crown of religious living, but its medieval saints would think their church was dead if they saw the scarcity of monks in America. The current of modern religion does not run away from the world, but toward it. Religion no longer spends its immense force in tearing men out of social life and isolating them from family, property, and state. Therefore, it is now free to direct that force toward Christianizing the common life. It no longer establishes monastic communities to live the true Christian and communistic life. Therefore, it ought now to make the life of the entire community truly Christian. If the disappearance of ascetic enthusiasm means the evaporation of Christian self-sacrifice, it would mean a net loss and a surrender of Christianity to worldliness. If it means that the old enthusiasm is now directed toward the moral regeneration of society, it would mean a new era for humanity. Ceremonialism, which early clogged the ethical vigor of Christianity, was broken in the Reformation and is slowly dying out. Greek and Roman Catholicism are faithful to it by virtue of their conservatism, but even there it is no longer a creative force. There are ritualistic drifts in a few Protestant bodies, but they are not part of modern life, but romantic reactions toward the past. The present tendency to a more ornate and liturgical worship in the radical Protestant denominations of America is aesthetic and not sacramental in motive. It is proof that sacramentalism is so dead that Protestant churches no longer need to fear the forms that might revive it. The priest is dying. The prophet can prepare to enter his heritage, provided the prophet himself is still alive with his ancient message of an ethical and social service of God. It is a commonplace that Christianity has grown less dogmatic. There is probably just as much earnest conviction, but it is modified by greater respect for the conviction of others and by deeper interest in right living. Men in churches fellowship freely with little regard to doctrinal uniformity. One of the chief antisocial forces has therewith disappeared from Christianity, and the subsidence of the speculative interest has to that extent left Christianity free to devote its thought to ethical and social problems. Christianity in the past was almost wholly churchly. The organized church absorbed the devotion, the ability, and the wealth of its members. To some degree, that is still true. The churches need time and money and must strive to get their share. For very many men and women, the best service they can render to the kingdom of God is really through the local church and its activities. In some measure, religion is still supposed to be bounded by the church, What is connected with the churches is religious. What is apart from them is supposed to be secular. Even very worldly affairs like bazaars and oyster suppers are religious if they raise the support or increase the popularity of a church. On the other hand, efforts to fight tuberculosis or secure parks and playgrounds are viewed as secular because they are not connected with the church. But there has been a great change. The wiser leaders of Christianity do not desire to monopolize the services of Christian men for the churches, but rejoice in seeing the power of religion flow out in the service of justice and mercy. Religion is less an institution and more a diffused force than ever before. The brazen vessel of the church was fatally cracked and broken by the Reformation, and its contents have ever since been leaking away into secular life. The state, the schools, the charitable organizations are now doing what the church used to do. The Roman Church continues its traditions of churchly authority and exclusiveness. Some Protestant bodies try, with more or less success, to imitate her role, but Protestantism cannot compete with the Roman Catholic Church in churchliness. In spite of itself, Protestantism has lost its ecclesiastical character and authority. But at the same time, Protestant Christianity has gained amazingly in its spiritual effectiveness on society. The Protestant nations have leaped forward in wealth, education, and political preponderance. The unfettering of intellectual and economic ability under the influence of this diffused force of Christianity is a historical miracle. Protestantism has even Protestantized the Roman Catholic Church. The Roman Church crumbles away before it in our country, that is America, and can only save its adherents by quarantining its children in parochial schools and its men and women in separate social and benevolent societies. The churches are profoundly needed as generators of the religious spirit, but they are no longer the sole sphere of action for the religious spirit. They exist to create the force which builds the kingdom of God on earth, the better humanity. By becoming less churchly, Christianity has, in fact, become fitter to regenerate the common life. And it is in this section of Christianity and the social crisis that a lot of people who object to the social gospel will find the reason for their resistance, and that is that Rauschenbusch's optimism about the future was very understandable in 1907 when this is written, but it's not understandable. It's not compatible with our developments in the last century since Rauschenbusch died. Christianity, that is mainstream Christianity, wherein Rauschenbusch finds his optimism, as in fact receded, whereas conservative Protestantism is more powerful than ever. It has been since the Reformation, or at least since the Puritan era. Its influence in pulling back, as it were, the social influence of the churches upon the culture as a whole. So the culture, that is the secular culture so-called, has now got a great divide separating it from the church culture. That was not visible when Rauschenbusch wrote this analysis around 1907. Next time, Rauschenbusch concludes his chapter on the work of social reconstruction. We'll put a link into John Wesley Brady's work, This Freedom Whence. Where did the Western freedoms that Rauschenbusch celebrates here come from? And in the very first of those videos, I asked the question, could this book, that is Brady's This Freedom Whence, be published now in the spirit of the time, now that we don't like to even think about where our Western freedoms came from? And also the playlist. So I'll put the first video, an introduction to Brady's work, and then the playlist itself. What has Christ been doing these 2,000 years?